Ebabizimana. Ebabizimana is a friend of mine who's related to someone that I'm going to talk about.
Great, great.
And Jody,
yeah,
Jody, thank you for joining us. Jody Evans is the co-founder of Code Pink Women for Peace.
So while we're still making sure that everyone has joined that's going to join us today, if people want to go ahead and introduce themselves in the chat, that's great. You can, your name, where you're joining us from today. I feel like we probably have like a large, we're covering a lot of area here. I know we have folks from here in the States, but also in Africa and also Europe joining us. So I'm very excited to have this international community. I'm going to go ahead and start recording. If you do not, for whatever reason, want to be on camera, because this is being recorded, you can go off camera now. But yes, let's see here. And if I can find the record button. Let's see. Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Great. Okay, so welcome everyone today. Like I said, so excited to have you all here for today's webinar, which is we're calling it Unmasking the Resource Wars, Rwanda, Congo, and Victoire, Ingabire. Let's see, give me just a second. Sorry, y'all. Before we get started, we have so many amazing guests that we're going to hear from. Each has a little something different to offer. But before we get started, I just wanted to go over some of our norms and just some housekeeping. We're here to learn today, so just coming here with open minds and ready to learn more and go a little deeper. So again, this is a friendly discussion, not a debate. So you can leave comments if you'd like in the chat. We just ask for folks to please be respectful. We're not here to mediate arguments. We want to learn and share from each other. I ask that everyone please stay muted. Like I said, we have some really amazing guests, and they took a lot of time to prepare these great presentations, and we want to make sure that they're able to give these presentations uninterrupted, and we want to make sure that we can reuse this content and share for folks who may not be able to have joined today, and to share it with them at another time. So I ask that you please try to stay muted throughout the presentations. After each speaker presents, we will have a Q&A. So if you have a question that comes up during these presentations, I ask that you put that question in the chat, and then I will be pulling the questions for the chat for the Q&A after the presentations. I mentioned that we have these great speakers and presenters today, and so I just want to tell you before we get started a little bit about each one of them. The first one we'll hear from Ann Garrison, and Ann is also the co-organizer, and I wouldn't say mostly organized this whole webinar. When Ann reached out to Code Pink about whether or not we would like to work with her to present this webinar today, it was an immediate yes on our end, because felt like this is such an important topic. It's a very timely topic. And while there's a lot of great organizers and activists and organizations that are doing a lot of work around conflicts in the Great Lakes region, it is a blind spot for many of us. And so to be able to kind of learn more and learn how we can engage and also be activated more around all the conflict and the need for liberation. it was just an immediate yes, like this is very necessary. So Anne, if you don't know, is a Black Agenda Report contributing editor based in the San Francisco Bay Area. She also contributes to the Gray Zone, Pacifica Radio, and other outlets. In 2014, Anne was the recipient of the Victoire Ingabire sorry if I probably mispronounced that, so I apologize in advance, but the Democracy Peace Prize for her reporting on the conflict in the African Great Lakes region. We're then going to hear from Judy Rever, a Canadian journalist who worked for Agence France Presse in Africa. She authored In Praise of Blood, Crimes of the Rwandan Patriot Front, and the forthcoming Rwanda's 30-year assault on Congo, the crimes, the criminals, and the cover-up. She also currently contributes to Canadian Dimension. In 2015, Judy was the recipient of the Victoire Ingabire Umawuza Democracy and Peace Prize for her groundbreaking investigative work on the Rwandan Genocide and Congo Wars. Then next, we're going to hear from Maurice Carney, who co-founded the Washington, D.C.-based Friends of the Congo to raise consciousness about the consequences of colonialism, neocolonialism on the Congolese people, and to support Congolese communities and organizers on the ground. Maurice has appeared on multiple media outlets and also contributes to Black Agenda Report. And then we're going to close it out, the presentations, by hearing from Marceline Ndawamungo, who co-founded the Women's International Network for Democracy and Peace to promote democracy and peace in Africa, and especially the Great Lakes region. Marceline grew up in Rwanda and then received political asylum in Belgium after the Rwandan Civil War and genocide. And so we have a lot to go over and a lot to learn and discuss. And so we're going to go right into it with Anne, who's going to start us off today, kind of contextualizing this 30-year conflict, and then also telling us about Victoire Ingabire, why she was imprisoned from 2010 to 2018, and why she's back in custody now, and then what we can do to prevent possible assassination or further imprisonment. So going to hand it all over to Anne now. Thanks, Anne.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. And I'm sorry I didn't go over Victoire's name, Victoire Ingabire, with you when I first started. You should have done that. When I first started doing the radio reporting about this, I would write intros to the radio reports, and the hosts reading the intros would come to that name and just sort of gulp and then do their best. Okay, we each have only 15 minutes before Q&A, so I'm going to jump right in and talk kind of fast. Thanks to everyone for coming. We considered doing this in January when people were through with the holidays, but we decided we should go ahead right now, right after the peace agreement and its immediate consequences, which are very bad. We're trying to shed some light on the underreported, little understood war in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, also known as Congo or DRC, but I'm going to call it Congo. At the same time, we're going to tell the story of Madame Victoire Ingabire, a political prisoner of epic courage. Her personal story makes this complicated regional story easier to understand, as personal stories often do. But first, I have to sketch out a little background. Rwanda has been waging war against the Congolese people and Rwandan Hutu refugees in Congo for 30 years, with catastrophic consequences, millions dead and millions more displaced. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, that's the UNHCR, and the UN's International Office for Migration, there are now more than 7 million internally displaced persons, called IDPs, in Congo. That's an IDP population second only to Sudan's. Also, according to the UNHCR, there are roughly 1.2 million Congolese refugees and asylum seekers in other African nations. Many of these Congolese people in both the IDP and refugee camps may never be able to go home because Rwandans have taken their homes. This is part of Rwandan President Paul Kagame's long-standing project to annex Congo's mineral-rich Kivu provinces, which neighbor Rwanda. The plan is drive them into IDP or refugee camps, then move Rwandans into their homes. I imagine everyone here knows that Congo has suffered immeasurably since colonization in the late 19th century because of its immense, unparalleled resource wealth, including some $24 trillion worth of minerals needed to manufacture every sort of high tech, from solar panels to cell phones, computers, electric cars, and weapons. Lockheed Martin cannot go to work without the 3 T's: tin, tungsten, and tantalum, which are heavily concentrated in the Kivu provinces that President Kagame is trying to annex. On December 4th, Kagame and Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi traveled to Washington to sit down with Donald Trump and sign a so-called peace deal called the Washington Accords. This was the culmination of months of negotiations during which Trump kept claiming the 30-year war deserved the Nobel Peace Prize, blah, blah, blah. Maurice will talk more about the peace deal, which is more of a minerals deal than anything else. Kagame and Tshisekedi glowered at one another throughout the ceremony and then didn't even shake hands. Much as in Gaza, the fighting never stopped while the deal was being negotiated, and as soon as it was signed, Rwandan troops and Rwanda's M23 militia escalated their offensive in the Kivu provinces. The spokesperson for the government of Congo's South Kivu province, which Rwandan forces displaced back in mid-February, they took the city and they drove out the existing government. The spokesman, said that another 200,000 Congolese people had been forced to flee their homes, and 400 more had been killed just since Kagame and Tshisekedi signed the agreement on the 4th. Now, Rwanda is now, for the first time, in control of Goma, the capital of North Kivu province, Bukavu, the capital of South Kivu province, and Uvira, the South Kivu city that the provincial government had retreated to when Rwanda and its M23 militia seized the provincial capital. They have set up parallel provincial and municipal administration, putting Kagame closer than ever to realizing his goal of annexing both provinces. 4 UN agencies and the International Rescue Committee say that 50,000 Congolese have fled into Burundi, which borders both Rwanda and Congo, as have many Congolese soldiers. Rwanda's weapons are so much more advanced than those of Congo and MONUSCO, the UN peacekeeping mission, that at this point there's very little military contest. When question not being answered is where are these weapons coming from? Now, today we, especially Judy and I, aim to expose the false narrative framework that this has gone on in for 30 years. To understand that, we have to go back to the 4-year Rwandan Civil War, launched on October 1st, 1990, which culminated in the infamous 100 days of massacres known as the Rwandan Genocide, or as Paul Kagame and his officialdom insists, the genocide against the Tutsi. This is the false narrative, the genocide against the Tutsi, only the Tutsi, that has hung over the Great Lakes region, most of all over Rwanda and Congo, ever since Kagame and his army seized power in Rwanda at the end of the 4-year war and the infamous 100 days of massacres. That was in July 1994. It's the false narrative. This is the false narrative that Victoire Ingabire challenged when, in 2010, she landed in Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, returning from exile in the Netherlands. And she went straight to the Genocide Memorial. There she asked, where is the memorial to the Hutu victims? The post-genocide Rwandan state is founded on Tutsi victimhood and Hutu guilt. So in that simple statement, where's the memorial to the Hutu victims? surrounded by cameras, she challenged the state's very foundation. And that foundation is based on a rapid, wholly unscientific count of the dead that was totally controlled by Kagame and his people. There was no time for doing such a study, but they quickly announced that Hutus had killed 1 million Tutsis. President Kagame has since used this false genocide narrative, genocide against the Tutsi, only the Tutsi narrative, to justify his totalitarian rule in Rwanda, where he uses an elaborate spy state, including Israel's most advanced surveillance tech. That's only one of his many connections to Israel. We are going to have a piece, we're going to paste some links in the chat. And there's one that I've written about this called The Victims' Pact, Rwanda and Israel. Kagame claims to be Rwanda's savior who ended the genocide against the Tutsi, and therefore the only one who can protect it from another genocide against the Tutsi going forward. He's used it to justify 30 years of war, atrocities, occupation, and resource plunder in Congo by forever saying that his army has to be there to fight the Federation for the Liberation of Rwanda, or FDLR, who threatened, this is a refugee group, a Hutu refugee group, who threatened, he claims, to return to Rwanda to finish the genocide. That's what he says when he's not claiming that his troops aren't there. He claims both simultaneously, that they're not there and that they have to be there to fight the FDLR. And the press feels way too compelled to respond to this kind of nonsense as though it were serious. Now, when the UN Security Council met last Thursday in response to Rwanda's renewed aggression, the Rwandan ambassador's rote response was 1,000% predictable. This, he said, is most fundamentally about the FDLR, the Hutu militia who threatened 30 years later to return to Rwanda and commit another genocide. FDLR, 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 genocide against the Tutsi, genocide against the Tutsi. This is what the Rwandan regime has repeated over and over and over for 30 years, even as millions of Congolese have died, millions more have been displaced, and Rwandan forces have smuggled billions of dollars worth of Congolese gold and minerals out to international corporations, governments, and markets. The ambassador actually talked about this as though it were a new thing. He were trying to explain for the first time. You see, what is most fundamental is the FDLR, etc. If the genocide against the Tutsi, only the Tutsi, is a false narrative, as it is, then the Rwandan argument falls apart. Then Kagame is not Rwanda's savior. He did not stop the genocide, as Judy can explain, and his tyrannical totalitarian rule is not saving Rwanda from another genocide. If the genocide against the Tutsi is a false narrative, as it is, then he also has no justification for being in Congo, as he says, chasing the FDLR, or keeping them from returning to Rwanda to commit another genocide, or defending Congolese Tutsis. That's a variation of his argument. The FDLR is a spent force, as UN reports have documented many times, but even if it were a viable threat to the Rwandan regime, Kagame would have no justification for being in Congo to hunt it down, because that's based on this false narrative, the genocide against the Tutsi. He would, if it were acknowledged that both groups are victims, then he would need to negotiate with refugees rather than going into Congo, blaming them for his occupation, atrocities, and plunder. His claim to be in Congo to stop the FDLR is preposterous anyway, because decades of UN investigations and investigations by Global Witness and other credible NGOs have demonstrated that Rwanda is actually smuggling billions of dollars worth of gold and minerals out of DRC. Anyone willing to spend a bit of time on this can read about it at the link to UN investigations on the UN website, which we'll have in the chat, and by going to Friends of the Congo, the Friends of the Congo website, and clicking Resource Center and then Reports. And we'll have a link to that in the chat as well. So Kagame's claim to be in Congo to protect Rwanda or to prevent another genocide against the Tutsis is a lie. He's there to steal resources. And the genocide against the Tutsi narrative is itself a lie. Now, there's no doubt that someone listening here is preparing to accuse me of genocide denial, but I would never deny that there was a Tutsi genocide in Rwanda, nor would I ever deny that there was also a Hutu genocide committed by then General, now President Paul Kagame and his advancing army as he marched towards the capital during the Rwandan Civil War. Judy will tell us how she investigated and documented Rwanda's Hutu genocide in a book she paid a very high price to complete. We've got a link to the book and to my review of the book in the chat. Now, to get to what I have to say about Victoire today, I need to skip back briefly to 1961 and the Rwandan Revolution, also known as the Hutu Power Revolution or the Social Revolution. Up until then, Rwanda had been a feudal monarchy in which the minority Tutsi, who were about 17% of the population, ruled over the majority Hutu, who were about 83%, and the Twa Pygmies, who were less than 1%. I don't want to risk oversimplifying this, so I should say that I don't fully understand the Hutu distinction in Rwanda, and I found that even Rwandans disagree about what it means. I reported on the case of Dr. Leopold Munyakazi, who is now stuck in a Rwandan prison for giving a lecture at several universities in Maryland, where he said that it's a class distinction, not an ethnic distinction, because Rwandans all speak the same language, eat the same food, and share the same culture. He said, therefore, that the Rwandan genocide was actually a class war. I've never heard anyone else describe it quite that way, but in any case, Leopold is sitting in a Rwandan prison for that narrative divergence. Tell even the slightest divergent narrative, and you're labeled a genocide denier, or worse yet, a genocide criminal. If you're in Rwanda, you're also sent to prison. If you're in the diaspora, you may suddenly find yourself arrested, incarcerated, and on trial 30 years after the genocide, because someone in Rwanda has suddenly accused you of genocide crime, and US or European authorities have then acted solely on the basis of that person's testimony. This is what Leopold, Dr. Munyakazi faced. It was horrible to see him deported like this. And there are a number of friends of mine who are here on the webinar who are trying to help friends and family members defend themselves in federal court in Boston. One is Jean-Leonard Teganya, who was accused of genocide 30 years later. He was a medical student at the time at the University of Butare. The jury came back and ruled that he was guilty in a mere 3 hours. Now, what did they know about Rwanda and the Rwandan genocide? Probably what they'd seen in Hotel Rwanda, and they probably heard the press's rote repetition of the false genocide against the Tutsi narrative, or maybe they'd read the Wikipedia. So, of course, a Hutu was guilty. Aren't they all guilty? In 1995, representatives of the National Holocaust Museum and the Simon Wiesenthal Center met with people from the new Rwandan government about how to shape, control, and even enforce this genocide against the Tutsi narrative and pursue these prosecutions, which reinforce the narrative. And deeply frightened Rwandans living in exile. They're afraid to speak because next thing they may be charged with genocide crime, prosecuted and deported to Rwanda. This was the beginning of a long-standing collaboration with Israel. This collaboration gave Zionists a chance to polish their image as victims of the worst crime of the 20th century, who remain ever vigilant on the front lines fighting genocide. Obviously, that image is now in tatters, but that was their reason for engaging in this collaboration. Among the benefits for Rwanda have been a false equation of the Holocaust and the so-called genocide against the Tutsi. In Europe, they've even tried to pass and enforce genocide denial laws like Holocaust denial laws. Now, one of the first things that Victoire said to me back in 2010 was that people think that Hutus, they're killers. They're killers. I didn't quite understand the significance of that, but I gradually came to understand that the false genocide against the Tutsi narrative has created a horrible racism against Rwandan Hutus that make them vulnerable to this judicial persecution throughout the Western world. One of the other things that Victoire said to me back in 2010 was that before, during, and after the genocide, Hutu people were killed. Hutu people were victims of crimes against humanity. She didn't say Hutu genocide or double genocide. You can go to prison for saying that in Rwanda, but she went to prison anyway from 2010 to 2018. Now she's in danger of going back to prison again. After listening to the discourse about the election in Rwanda and talking to the three candidates who weren't allowed to register, I realized that this 2010 election wasn't about what one might expect. It wasn't about schools, roads, development, taxes, etc. It was an argument about the genocide. I wrote a piece for a Canadian journal to that effect. And the next thing I knew, it had been republished by 3 African publications. And the late Professor Ed Herman, co-author of Manufacturing Consent, called and said he wanted to send me a copy of his book, The Politics of Genocide. It then took me some years and quite a bit more reading to fully understand the significance of what Victoire said in 2010. One of the most important books I read was Judy Reaver's In Praise of Blood, Crimes of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, published in 2018. She's our next speaker, and I want to say a few things about what she went through to publish her book before passing her the mic. Kagame operatives were calling her home in Canada, threatening her and her family, including her 2 grammar school-aged daughters. When she was checking into a hotel in Brussels, where she'd gone to do some research, 2 Belgian security operatives appeared at either side of her, saying they had intelligence that there were Rwandan operatives in the country to kill her, and that they, the 2 Belgian operatives, were going to be by her side for the rest of the time she was there. So here's Judy Reaver, author of In Praise of Blood, Crimes of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, and the forthcoming Rwanda's 30-year assault on the Congo. Links to both of these books are in the chat, as are links to several pieces I've written about Victoire and my piece, The Victims' Pact, Rwanda and Israel. So Judy, go ahead.
Thank you, Ann Garrison, for that presentation, pertinent, coherent, and for assembling this panel. Thank you. Anne has been, as many of you know, has been on the journalistic front lines for many years, addressing the war in Congo and also the human rights violations in Rwanda. I also want to thank Code Pink for all their members for their clarity and courage and for hosting this event. So I wanted to start with an anecdote about an encounter I had with a Rwandan human rights activist, somebody who was highly regarded, who worked in Rwanda in the 1990s. He ran a prominent organization. And I met him one night in a cafe. He asked me not to use his name, but he provided me with some rich background about how after Kagame and his army took power in 1994 in July, he began and his team began to document the number of Hutus who were disappearing, the number of Hutus who were being thrown in jail arbitrarily, people who were being murdered, and the number of Hutus whose land was being seized. And at the same time as they were trying to document these crimes, his team members were disappearing one by one. So the whistleblowers and the people exposing these crimes were being eliminated. So this is a kind of what I call this the RPF. RPF is the Rwandan Patriotic Front. This is Kagame's regime. it is a tactic of slow predation, and it's a type of psychological warfare. And it turned out that this human rights activist, highly regarded, a few of his relatives were targeted as well, were killed, and he eventually fled with his immediate family in order to survive. So he lives in the West. Now, the same psychological warfare has been waged against Victoire Ingabire. And what has happened for people who have followed her to some extent is her, as she stood up for Rwanda and as she's tried to tell the truth, her young supporters, brilliant people who have been part of her political party, her assistants, people who have supported her in various ways, have been either jailed or murdered or forcibly disappeared. And this is a great tragedy. She did not, however, flee. She remained in Rwanda while one by one, many of her supporters, her core group, have been silenced or eliminated. So her remaining in Rwanda is a testament to her strength, who she is, but it also shows to what extent the regime in power has underestimated her mettle. So as Anne said, she encountered problems immediately after returning to Rwanda when she challenged the official narrative that Anne was explaining. She wanted to correct the distorted history, but also provide recognition or urge recognition of Hutu victims as well, and possibly promote the idea of justice, which would mean people in power be prosecuted. So I've also in my work tried to address this distorted history, and I first became aware of the incoherence of the Rwandan genocide narrative, the official narrative, when I went to Congo to cover the humanitarian crisis in 1997. And so I went there within a few days of Mobutu Sese Seko being toppled by Kagame's forces. And what had happened in 1996 and 97 is Kagame's army invaded the Congo and began a military sweep across that country and staged a committed, wide-scale, organized massacres against Rwandan Hutu refugees in Congo. And upwards of 200,000 of these people, of these Hutu refugees, were killed, although there have been no empirical studies, no real investigation of their deaths. So why were they in Congo to begin with? They had fled to Congo and established themselves in camps after the Rwandan genocide. And they were still in Congo 2.5 years after the genocide. And so when I went, pardon? Okay. When I went there and I encountered survivors in the forest, I asked them, why did you not go home? Why did you, first of all, flee Rwanda in 1994? And why did you stay in Congo languishing in these refugee camps? It didn't make sense to me. And, you know, therefore they'd been a target of Kagame's forces 2.5 years later. And one after the other told me that they fled Rwanda in the first place in 1994 because Kagame's Tutsi army was killing their families, had killed their family members. And many of them were afraid of going home because there were a number of Rwandan Hutu refugees who had been going home and they were disappearing. And I had never heard these kinds of stories before. It was 1997. I had read about the Rwandan genocide. I had read that there was one category of victim and one category of perpetrator, that the Tutsis were victims and the Hutus were the perpetrators. And these Hutus in Congo were telling me that Kagame's forces had systematically massacred them as well. And so I knew that this was a story I needed to, I had seen what Kagame was capable of in Congo. And so I believed these Hutu refugees, and I began to do some rigorous research. So over the last 3 decades, I've tried to examine and document the nature and scale of the killings carried out by Kagame's forces before, during, and after the genocide. Other people have attempted to do this, probably not in as much detail as I have. But my research, I like to say, is based on 3 layers of evidence, okay? First layer is evidence from survivors, witnesses, and contextual witnesses. Many of them are ethnic Hutu, okay? The second layer of evidence, very, very important, which corroborates the first layer, is from Tutsi insiders. And these are Tutsi officers and Tutsi soldiers, former Tutsis who broke with Kagame's regime, who have enlightened me about the nature, how it worked, and what the Tutsi army did. These people have fled and can speak freely. The third layer of evidence is the UN confidential documents that I got a hold of. Much of it is exculpatory evidence from the UN tribunal proceedings. That the UN tribunal was set up after the genocide to prosecute the most serious crimes. I also got a hold of confidential, not only exculpatory, but confidential leaked documents that were given to me by a whistleblower. So what are my findings? Just the broad strokes of my findings that I published in my book In Praise of Blood in 2018 that Anne mentioned. My findings, and some of these have been revealed by other people who have done investigations. The Rwandan Patriotic Front under Kagame ignited the genocide, ignited the cataclysm of violence by shooting down the plane that was carrying the Rwandan and Burundian presidents. That act unleashed the violence. RPF commandos were responsible for that. Immediately after the plane attack, soldiers from the RPF military intelligence, also soldiers from Kagame's High Command Battalion and Training Wing, they began to carry out systematic massacres of Hutu civilians in zones that the RPF had quickly seized behind the battlefront. So these mobile forces operated from the northern prefecture of Buyumba, quickly came down the southeastern part of the country through Kibungo, and then throughout the rest of Rwanda. These were well-planned operations, not reprisal massacres. They were preemptive and began in zones already under RPF control on April 6, 1994 and onward. So these death squads, Kagame's death squads, went house to house and targeted Hutus in swamps and in fields. Hutu community leaders were targeted first, and then peasants. Large groups of Hutus were invited to meetings and killed with guns, grenades, and something called agafunis. Those were hoes. In some cases, the Hutus were dumped in mass graves with Tutsis who had been massacred earlier by Hutu militia. The RPF loaded thousands of Hutus onto trucks at night and brought them to a place called Gabiro on the edge of the Akagera Park, where they were shot and burned. So there were methods of concealment. Gabiro, at Kagera Park, off limits to all NGOs in the UN. Journalists, when they eventually were allowed to come in May 1994, they were escorted around by the RPF and told the RPF's version of events. So again, RPF killings were highly organized and systematic, and I say amounted to an attempt to destroy, in part, Hutus as an ethnic group. These RPF operations also continued to a lesser degree in later years, and they constitute genocide against Hutus. At the same time, I point this out very clearly in my book, Tutsis were being, in 1994, systematically slaughtered in Hutu-controlled zones and were victims of a genocide. Hutu militia and elements of the Hutu state, often local, committed a genocide against Tutsis. But, and I want to point this out, it's very important, the RPF also fueled the genocide against Tutsis. How did they do that? RPF commandos, Tutsi commandos, from the High Command Battalion and the Directorate of Military Intelligence infiltrated Hutu militias and assisted in and helped kill Tutsis in clandestine operations throughout the country. So the infiltration of these Tutsi commandos throughout Rwanda was the key to the RPF's success in seizing territory. And this gives us some clue as to how the genocide unfolded. So I have urged more research to be done to understand the way the genocide unfolded against Tutsis. And I can tell you, Tutsi survivors and RPF deserters, they live in terror, and many of them are afraid to give their accounts. And the accounts that they have given inside Rwanda are in a crime scene that's controlled by Kagame, under the influence of Kagame. And I have said many times that NGOs and the United Nations and human rights organizations like Human Rights did not do a proper job. They did not carry out quantitative and qualitative studies and do rigorous interviews with Hutus who had fled, or Tutsis who had fled, for that matter, who could speak freely without the specter of violence. And Hutus were not asked, and they could have been asked, because hundreds of thousands, more than 1 million, were in camps. Human Rights Watch could have done those studies, that investigation. It did not. So what were the RPF objectives during and after the genocide? Number one, eliminate as many Hutu civilians as possible to establish ethnic domination, to demonize Hutus and the former regime in order to establish moral legitimacy on the international stage, remove Hutus from political and military power and replace them with Tutsis, target Hutu intellectuals, community leaders, because once the core political, military, and cultural leadership was gone, the RPF could govern without resistance. So they also molded the population map to secure land and housing for Tutsi returnees who had lived in Uganda, Congo, and Burundi for decades. And finally, to instill fear in the Rwandan population. So I don't want to talk too much longer. I want to give Maurice a chance to speak, and Marceline, but so many Rwandans and Congolese people have tried to alert the international community to these crimes over decades, but the West has deliberately concealed the evidence. And I want to tell you just one or two ways they have concealed it. In May 1994, as Kagame's troops were killing in Kibungo, killing Hutus and throwing the bodies in the Kagera River, dumping those bodies, the United Nations and the US government knew what was going on, because that was an area that had been seized I mean, these bodies were found in June and July. Kagame's troops had seized that zone in late April. So the world was left to understand that those victims in the Kagera River, which came to symbolize the horror and the evil of the Rwandan genocide, because the images were broadcast on international television screens, those victims were victims of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, Kagame's forces. There were also other evidence, like Robert Gassoni's studies that show that 40,000 Hutu refugees were slaughtered in systematic massacres in 1/3 of the communes he visited. And, you know, the United Nations tribunal that was set up to investigate these crimes, they had collected they collected enough prima facie evidence to prosecute or at least issue indictments. They recruited under Carla Del Ponte, who was chief prosecutor of the tribunal from 1999 until 2003, and 41 witness statements. And she was dismissed for trying to indict and prosecute not only Kagame himself, but his senior entourage. And she was replaced by a more malleable chief prosecutor, one who wouldn't go ahead and indict Kagame for these crimes. And so what happened is no prosecutions were ever undertaken by the UN against the RPF. The United States transferred jurisdiction for prosecuting these crimes from the United Nations to Rwanda itself, so allowing the killers to prosecute themselves, which they, of course, never did. So the UN granted Kagame legal immunity from war crimes and terrorism. And it is that tragedy, obstruction of justice, that allowed Kagame's dark crusade in Congo, because if he had been stopped in either 1999, when Carla Del Ponte first gathered evidence, or Louise Arbour, the Canadian prosecutor who first gathered evidence that Kagame's commandos were responsible for shooting down the plane, that was dismissed as well by her decision. If he and his entourage had been stopped by the international authorities, he wouldn't have been able to wage war in Congo, invade, and then wage for the last 30 years. So the United Nations and the US and other members of the Security Council have given Rwanda under Paul Kagame the means to wage this war. And I just want to stop there and give Maurice the chance to explain the devastation in Congo and what that war has been about.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Anne, and certainly thanks to Code Pink for hosting this discussion. The Friends of the Congo, as stated at the outset, we are a Pan-African solidarity institution based here in Washington, D.C., and with two overarching aims. One is to raise global consciousness about what's transpiring in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the second is to provide support to local institutions, those that are on the front lines who are organizing for change inside of the country. Based on what Anne and Judy has shared, and also a comment that Melissa made, I think there are a few structural elements that I will address. Melissa said that Rwanda, Congo, the heart of the African continent there is a blind spot for many of us, right? She said it's a blind spot for many of us. And with her saying that, that speaks to one of the parts of our mission, because we know that that part of the world is a blind spot for a lot of people. So we have to raise global consciousness, raise awareness, educate people about what's unfolding in the heart of the African continent. And that blind spot is not dangling out there by itself, right? It's the product of a colonial legacy, right? And the colonial legacy is not solely a question of lack of infrastructure, hyper-exploitation, an extractivism system, but it also carries with it the colonial prism through which we see Africa, right? Writ large. Africa is the dark continent. That's a colonial legacy. And a la Joseph Conrad, the Congo is the heart of darkness, right? So what happens there makes us blind because we already know all we need to know about those people, right? They're imbued with these atavistic qualities that condemns them to perpetual violence. So automatically, we write off a lot of the elements that Judy just talked about, the geostrategic interference, right? Even in the face of a history that's pretty much well known, right? That the United States mounted its largest covert action in the world to overthrow Congo's democratically elected leader, Patrice Lumumba, in 1960, right? He befell a fate not fundamentally different in terms of his overthrow that we saw, with Mogadishu in Iran, or Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala, or Allende in Chile. So that is, in that part of the world, for us who are anti-imperialist, leftists, that is the tradition in which Congo falls, right? A tradition of geostrategic interference. So when crimes are committed and they're evident, and the people or entities that are responsible for committing those crimes are brought to book, or there's an attempt to bring them to justice, because of geostrategic interests, right, we see the intervention. And that's been a major part of the challenge around the Congo, that because of the interference, because of the pursuit of its strategic interests, the United States, United Kingdom, the European Union, France, right, because of that intervention, it has injected or installed three dominant features where we see this 30-year war that's been ongoing. One, as Judy laid out, is this impunity, right? She said, well, if Kagame was held to account in the late 1990s, the conflict that we see today wouldn't be as we see it, right? So because there is impunity, this leader and group of elites, they can act, right, with impunity because they have the backing, of the West. The head of the CIA, Larry Devlin, he wrote a book entitled Chief of Station Congo. And his book talked about how he overthrew the Lumumba government. Right? It's really a playbook for overthrowing a democratically elected leader. And in this book, he was talking to Mobutu. He recounted a conversation he was having with Mobutu. And he was talking to Mobutu about going about overthrowing Lumumba. And Mobutu asked him, do they have our back? And Devlin said, oh, you mean the big man? In reference to Eisenhower. And Devlin said to Mobutu, yes, this is coming from the top, right? So when these despots, right, know that they have the backing of the empire, that frees them up to act with impunity because they know they will not have to account. They will not have to face justice, right? They'll get diplomatic cover. They'll get political cover so they can commit the most heinous crimes, right? And know that they'll be all right because they have the empire behind them. So this is what's playing out in the Congo and in Rwanda. Kagame is clear because of the, not solely because he was trained in Fort Leavenworth, right? But because he has offered himself up to the empire, right? And their allies. So Netanyahu wants to dispose of asylees, and Kagame said, well, you can send them here to Rwanda. We'll take care of asylees. You can offload them on us. Boris Johnson says, well, I want to do the same thing. Kagame said, I'm at your service, right? Donald Trump today said, we want to get rid of these deported folks. So Kagame said, yes, send that Iraqi. We'll take the Iraqi. And then for $100,000 a head, we'll take whoever else you want to bring. So, or even Macron. Macron said to Kagame, well, hey, we got some challenges in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique. The total energies, this natural gas concessions are under threat by militia groups. Can you send your soldiers to go take care of that? And he says, yes, I can send my soldiers to go take care of that. So the European Union gives them $20 million euros each year at the behest of Macron, right? So for us on the outside who are engaged in solidarity work, it's vital that we pierce this colonial veil and not have a blind spot where we don't have blind spots elsewhere, where this is a product of a geostrategic intrigue, right? What we see unfolding, and that the empire has its hand in it. And these local actors where they commit their crimes locally, and then you have the empire and their backers cleanse those crimes on the international scene globally. So it's vital for us as organizers, as activists, right, to be reading Judy's book, to be learning so that we can be clear about the narrative, right? A narrative that counters everything that this culture tells us that's actually happening there in Africa, in the heart of darkness. So I think that's really key for us. And I see Code Pink being in a position to play a crucial role, educating its network, which you're doing by providing a platform for us to speak with you today, tapping into a narrative that connects what's happening in the heart of the African continent to geopolitical dynamics, right? So that's so crucial. Now, when these crimes are committed, right, by the likes of the Kagames and the likes of Yoweri Museveni, the president of Uganda, Kagame in particular, he engages in what we call sports washing, right? These crimes are so egregious that left on their own, right, left open bare, it would become evident to folks that, hey, this guy's a bad guy. Right? So in an effort to cleanse its image, not fundamentally different from United Arab Emirates or from Israel, Rwanda engages in sports washing. How do they do that? Well, they enter into sponsorship deals with sports teams like Arsenal in England, or Bayern in Germany, or Paris Saint-Germain in France, or most recently, the Los Angeles Clippers, right there in Los Angeles Rams. They enter into sponsorship deals that presents Rwanda in a positive image. So if Rwanda is connected to the Los Angeles Clippers, surely the Los Angeles Clippers wouldn't be in bed with a genocidal maniac. What you guys are saying there, this Judy River book and all that, that doesn't jive. You're putting me in a space of cognitive dissonance. You're telling me this guy here that's hobnobbing with the Los Angeles Clippers and the Los Angeles Rams is responsible for the killing of millions of Africans? That doesn't even make sense. Plus, they're in the NBA's in support of them. They have the National Basketball Association league there. Now, the National Basketball Association would not be in bed with a despotic killer, right? So here again, this is where we enter as Code Pink, Friends of the Congo, the Gunners of Arsenal, right? We pierce the veil and expose the truth like the Gunners of Arsenal, the fan club of the Arsenal football team, putting pressure on their football team to say, hey, this guy is a bad guy, you're in sponsorship with him. We as fans, we're not in agreement with this, right? So when we think about that part of Africa, we often think or believe that there aren't actionable items that we can take, where we can have an impact. The fans of the Arsenal football team disagree. They said, we're gonna take action. And just this year, or just this really with the past few weeks, Arsenal football team said they're gonna cut their ties with the Rwandan government, right? So these are some of the elements that I'd like to share. One, that we educate ourselves about what's happening. Two, that we subscribe to the narrative that comes from the masses. Judy was sharing with you people she spoke with. Victoire Ingabire, who's been a courageous woman. I can see Code Pink lifting her up as an example of women under the Kagame regime, because we're often told, well, you know, X percentage of the Rwandan parliament is made up of women, right? Narrative that's put out there. But the last, 2 or 3 presidential elections in Rwanda, if you want to call them that, what happened? Women were arrested for even daring to run for office, right? Victoire Ingabire, Diane Rwigara, arrested because they challenged Kagame. So we can take up those narratives and share with our network so people have a clear understanding of what's unfolding. Now, just to wrap up, a major part of the challenge around the Congo is really connected to Rwanda, in that whether it's in Rwanda, in Uganda, or the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the leadership is a neo-colonial leadership. That is to say, they owe, right, their allegiance to the empire, to people outside of the African continent, right? So what does that mean for the Congo in particular? Well, if their interests are outside, they're not really concerned about the interests of their people. So Kagame can attack the Congo, right? The whole world can say, well, hey, your soldiers are in the Congo, you know, as the United Nations did this February, Resolution 2773, where the UN Security Council voted 15-0 that Rwanda's soldiers are in the Congo killing people, and that they should leave immediately without any precondition, cut their ties with the militia groups that they're in command and control of, implement a ceasefire, provide humanitarian quarter, right? This is what the entire world said. However, if you have a neocolonial leadership in Congo whose primary concern is remaining in power, you don't necessarily rally behind that. You come up with an avenue that's going to preserve your power, preserve your presence in office. So you go to Donald Trump and you say, hey, Donald Trump, I hear you were talking to Zelensky and you wanted to engage in a mineral for security swap. Well, Congo's got all kinds of minerals. Why don't you come to the Congo, help us out with this Kagame guy, and you can have access. And that's where we are today, where we see, because of the neo-colonial leadership in Kigali, attacking Congo, in Kampala, attacking Congo, in Kinshasa, totally disconnected from the people and the people's interests. We see a situation where Congo's wealth is being sold off because of a strategic partnership that Kagame and Tshisekedi and Donald Trump just signed in Washington, D.C. We see 70 million Congolese languishing in extreme poverty. World Bank says 70 million to 110 million Congolese live in less than $2.15 a day. We see Israeli billionaire like Dan Gertler, who has access to those minerals in the Congo, pulling in $200,000 a day in royalty. One Israeli billionaire, $200,000 a day in royalties from access to Congo's minerals because of the neo-colonial leadership there. 70 million Congolese living on $2.15 a day. So make no mistake about it. It's not solely a Congolese question. It's not solely a Rwandan question, but it's a geostrategic question where the empire, whether it's France or in, UK or Belgian, European Union that's got a critical minerals deal with Kagame, United States, their interests are being met from the status quo, from Kagame having impunity, no accountability, no justice, from the neocolonial leadership in Kinshasa selling off the minerals where Donald Trump says, we're gonna get rich, right? So my talk is really an appeal to the activists out there, to those who are engaged in mobilizing against, the genocide in Palestine, trying to block US invasion of Venezuela, that the Congo and what's happening in the heart of the African continent fits in that anti-imperialist, leftist, activism. So that's the appeal that we make, that you be engaged in a way that can support the masses of Congolese, hopefully bring an end to the impunity, inject some level of accountability through activism, and set us on a path to delivering justice for the people of the Congo and the Great Lakes region writ large, who have been trapped in a neo-colonial setup for the past 3 decades.
Thank you, Maurice. We're gonna go ahead and pass it on over to Marceline. Let's see.
And Nduamungu. Nduamungu.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for organizing this and for having us. I don't know what to say after all the presentations which were made this evening, in Europe. So I am in Belgium. I will present you our organization. It's a women organization which is called International Women's Network for Democracy and Peace. It was established in 2009 in Belgium, at the same time as in Canada and the Netherlands. Later, we got a desk in France too. So we are there in 4 countries, but we are still looking for other desks to open, hopefully. Our goals when we created our association or organization was to make people be aware of what is happening in the Great Lakes region of Africa, especially by supporting women leadership. That's why we encourage the women like Victoire Ingabire, who is doing the tremendous work over there. We encourage them and we support her work. We also support other women who tried to challenge the dictatorship there. For example, Diana Rwigara, who tried to run for president and who was put in prison too. So among other activities, we have created an award called Prix Victoire Ingabire Umuhoza pour la démocratie et la paix in French. It is an award that we give to people to encourage them to work for peace and truth, especially in the region the region of Great Lakes in Africa, because all the truth is not told. So we have been issuing that award from 2012, and next year on 28th of February, it will be the 15th time. So we invite you to join us in Brussels, in Belgium. Karibu, as they say in Swahili. The award is named after the name of Victoire Ingabire Umuhoza. because she was so inspiring to us as women. She's very courageous. She she dared go there knowing what was waiting for her, because you can't face a dictatorship uh, if you are if you have your if you fear. So the award is named after her name, but she's not the one who created it, because people confuse. She's not the one who created the award. The award was created by our organization, and the people also confuse us and make mistaken us as her political wing, but we are not. We just support her work. We support her struggle, and for now, we are organizing a GoFundMe for to cover her legal fees, because there is no other organizations paying um, for her there, because as Anne already pointed out, many people who could help her have been put in prison or have disappeared. So we are doing this for the time being. So many people don't know who Victoire is, but I think for now information is widely available on internet. But I can tell you that she was born in 1968. When the Rwandan genocide occurred, she was in the Netherlands on professional training. So when the genocide happened, she was not in the country. That's why it is very difficult for the Rwandan regime to accuse her of having participated in the genocide, because that is the main uh, the the main offense they put to any people challenging them. So she was not in Rwanda. They can't say that she participated in the genocide. Then she was joined by her family in the Netherlands. She worked for the company. She was being trained in the Netherlands, and she resigned in 2009 in preparation of her return to Rwanda. She wanted to compete with uh, President Kagame in the 2010 elections. So she went in Rwanda in January 2010. She tried to register the political party she was presiding at that moment, FDU, or Force Democratique Unifiée, but she didn't succeed because the government made some hurdles on her way, and her political party was not registered. So, as Anne said, she visited the genocide memorial at Gisozi, and she pronounced uh, a speech asking asking for the government to acknowledge the deaths of Hutus. So at that moment, the government she was mistaken by the government, which began telling to people that she was promoting double genocide just because she asked for Hutus to be remembered, and she asked where they are buried, and the government um, started a smearing campaign saying that she promotes double genocide. So in October 2010, she was put in prison for, among other things, because of the speech she pronounced at Gisozi. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison, but she filed an appeal. After that appeal, The sentence was put to 15 years. Okay, so being in prison in 2010, she normally had to get out of prison in 2025, but she was pardoned by the president in 2018, together with the gospel singer Kizito Mihigo, the same day. And so, but in the meantime, all of the people who were working with her disappeared, were killed, and many are in prison. So she's alone. But she's not discouraged by that. But many people outside here don't know that for the time being, now she was re-imprisoned in June, but there in the country, she has not, she has no one to look after her, to work with her. She doesn't have any political bureau. She has nothing. And in this year, in 2025, she would have recovered her civic rights, because people need to know that when you go to prison for 6 months in Rwanda, you lose your civic rights. So, as she was pardoned in 2018, and that in 2025, she was about to recover her civic rights, the government or the regime invented other offenses, and she was put back in prison in June. And we believe that they did that for her not to recover her civic rights, and she can't compete if because from 2025 they will again count X months, and she will not compete for the elections. Anyway, her party is not registered, so she can't say I go to. She can't compete for the highest position in elections because her party is unregistered, and this is not fair, because RPF is a political party, but it is the one which gives clearance for political parties to register. So it is at the same time judge and party. It can't be fair towards other political parties. And then I think that I can say many things about Victoire. In 2017, she had filed a complaint to the African Court, and the African Court for Human Rights said that the Rwandan government, the Rwandan authorities had misjudged her. The Rwandan government was fined for compensation to her, but that was never given to Victoire. And what I can say to wrap up with what I'm saying is that I have a word to Congolese audience. I can tell them that not all Rwandans agree with the country's invasion by Rwanda. We are here. I'm here as a Rwandan refugee. I am victim of the same regime. So I can tell them that let's unite in struggle for peace in our region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I know I learned a lot more than I knew before going into this this webinar today. So I'm extremely grateful for those presentations. So now we want to open it up to some questions. There were a couple that I gathered from the chat. So give me just a second. Let me pull them up. I don't want to miss any one session. The first one was, and it was when Anne was speaking, and I think, Anne, you were given the context of the 30-year conflict, and someone asked, what part did the Clintons play in this story? So if anyone has any insight they want to offer to that, feel free to come off mute. It's just open to any of the panelists, so. Oh, Anne, you're muted.
Bill Clinton has been shedding crocodile tears since 1994, saying that he so regretted that he did not intervene, famously did not intervene. Samantha Power, humanitarian interventionist extraordinaire, billed for career on complaining that the Clinton regime did not intervene at the time. But in fact, they did intervene. This is one instance when a military intervention, organized by the UN, not by the US or NATO, could have made a difference. There was a UN peacekeeping mission there on the ground, and there was a proposal in the UN Security Council to send more troops to beef up the UN peacekeeping operation to stop the genocide. Bill Clinton intervened.
Thank you.
Bill Clinton intervened to make sure that that did not happen. He sent his UN ambassador, Madeleine Albright, to the UN Security Council to let them know that the US would veto. So that did not happen. Ever since he's been championing Kagame, in 2009, he gave Kagame, one of the worst war criminals in the world, a Global Citizen Award. And this is a way of covering his own crimes, everything that he had to do with this, supporting the Kagame regime all the way, supporting the invasion of Congo, which happened while he was still in office. So Bill Clinton has been very much a partner in crime, and it is very important to remember that he sent his UN ambassador to veto an expansion of the peacekeeping mission that could have stopped the genocide. Is because their guy, Paul Kagame was their guy. They wanted to see him win. They wanted to see him seize power in Kigali. So they didn't want to stop the genocide.
We hear so much about the U.S. being that veto for ceasefires and peace so often. So
I would just like to reiterate something I said it was during Bill Clinton's administration that, of course, as Anne pointed out, the genocide occurred. And I mentioned earlier that the United States had, through their satellites and through their intelligence on the ground, they knew exactly what was happening, who shot down the plane, Kagame's commandos, and then who was doing the killings in which prefecture. And they certainly knew that Kagame's troops were killing massively in the north and the east. And they covered up those crimes and then ensured, it's very important, that Kagame and his army, his senior officials, would not be prosecuted at the UN tribunal for these crimes. It was the US ambassador to the, US war crimes ambassador, Pierre Prosper, who ensured that the jurisdiction for prosecuting those crimes would be transferred from the UN to Rwanda, as I mentioned. And so the US cemented Kagame's impunity and then helped organize and support Kagame's invasion of Congo, which is part of what I explore in the book that is going to be published in March. So I talk about the US role in regime change and how the United States in particular has given Kagame the means to wage this war in which millions of Congolese have died. So US officials have aided and abetted these crimes, and I argue that these individuals should be prosecuted. Kagame and his militia and his senior officials have gotten off scot-free. At the ICC, the International Criminal Tribunal, and at the ICTR, which has now wound down. But there is still a possibility through class action suits and civil and criminal procedures in Western jurisdiction for Congolese victims and Rwandan victims to prosecute Western officials who are complicit.
Judy, could you also say something about AMC Minerals in Hope, Arkansas?
Well, yes. I mean, at the time when Kagame was sweeping across Zaire, Congo, and in April, before Mobutu Sese Seko was officially toppled, Kagame and his rebel grouping, AFDL, were doing deals with America Mineral Fields, which was at the time a Toronto listed firm, but based in Arkansas in Bill Clinton's hometown. And the head of that company was Raymond Boule, who was close enough to Clinton at the time. So, I mean, there was a clear connection. And if you look at the evidence, there were a lot of Western financial backers at the time, not just AMF, but there were some brokerage houses, some banking officials, other mining officials, mining companies who were brought in on a plane in April to Lubumbashi, a mineral-rich region, before Mobutu is being toppled. Also, Robin Sanders, who was an official on the National Security Council under Bill Clinton. So that's a U.S. official who's giving the green light and her approval to financial deals with rebels and Paul Kagame, who are undertaking regime change, which is, of course, a violation, which was a violation of the territorial integrity of that country at the time. But in my mind, the most egregious thing, of course, that was a gateway to all the other crimes that were going to occur in the decades to come. But this was happening amid the wide-scale systematic slaughter of Hutus, Congolese Hutus, and Rwandan Hutus by Kagame's troops. And this is just incredible. This is why I say there was aiding and abetting of these crimes, and these people should be held accountable.
Thank you for that. And it looks like Maurice also shared an article also referencing what Judy was just talking about in the chat as well. So this next question, and I believe the person who asked this question said that Maurice actually answered it after they asked the question, but I'm just going to pose it for the panel just so that other folks might have a chance. But the question is, is the interest of the U.S., Israel, and Europe in supporting RPF and their involvement in the control of the narrative? And are the sweetheart deals that's happening with financial interest and are weapons manufacturers a factor?
Well, I can just briefly say that the United States, first starting under the Bush administration, supported the RPF in its founding in the 1980s, when the when the founding members were part of Yoweri Museveni's rebel movement, and then when Museveni came to power in 1986. And so it was then the United States started supporting Yoweri Museveni and Paul Kagame as geopolitical linchpins. Why is that? Because essentially, as I see it, they were interested in using these individuals as a bulwark against Islamic influence from possibly Sudan and other places on the African continent. And so Yoweri Museveni and Paul Kagame have been loyal servants to US empire interests in that respect. Also, if you see the Congo, Central Africa, Paul Kagame in particular has been used to open up that economic corridor. Anne alluded to this, so did Maurice, opening up the economic corridor to Western and also Asian multinationals. And if you look at under Mobutu, copper and cobalt had plummeted. They were no longer interested in maintaining Mobutu as head of state. Congo had to be open for business. And you've seen what was their rationale, because in the years after that overthrow, copper, cobalt production have soared. I've documented it. Also, the artisanal minerals, just as strategic, perhaps even more, in the Eastern Kivus, and that's where Kagame's militias and Kagame's troops traffic vast amounts of strategic minerals like tantalum, tungsten, and tin. And so Rwanda has been the hub for the export of those minerals, of the 3T minerals, we call them. So they're laundered, they're plundered, laundered, trafficked from Congo. They're sold in from Rwanda onto the international market, the global supply chain. And these are the minerals, of course, with cobalt and copper that are essential for our global economy. And they're getting them cheap, right? Congo supplies, because Congo isn't sovereign. They're getting them for cheap.
Thank you, Judy. Does anyone else on the panel want to chime in there? Or we have just like, I think, one more question in the chat.
Just to add that, to the question, that it goes beyond the provision of arms. It also has to do with intelligence. It has to do with training. UN group of experts documented the shipment of weapons to Kagame to Rwanda through Israel. We see that when Kagame needed the tools in order to spy on people in Rwanda and the Great Lakes region, the Pegasus spyware developed in Israel was also provided to him. Both, even in the latest UN group of experts talking about Rwanda's latest attack against the Congo, they talked about Rwanda getting Israeli support for training of its soldiers that are backing the M23. So whether you're talking about arms, whether you're talking about intelligence, whether you're talking about training, we see that Kagame has that connection. And also in the narrative too, Anne talks about this quite a bit, but usually when you see particularly Jewish institutions in the United States, when they engage members of Congress, right, and they take them on these trips to Israel as a way of connecting members of Congress to Israel, they also include Rwanda in that as well. So when it comes to the genocide narrative, you see Rwanda being included. The last trip by the members of the Congressional Black Caucus to Israel, after they were in Israel, they also then went to went to Rwanda. This was organized by a Jewish educational organization out of Indiana. So when we talk about this genocide narrative, it's really powerful because as we see Netanyahu weaponize genocide in the genocide that is committing against the Palestinians, Kagame also weaponizes genocide in order to justify his aggression and plunder. And what the United Nations says in the United Nations did what they call a mapping report, United Nations mapping exercise report that they published in 2010, which drew up on what Judy is talking about, the slaughter of the Hutus in 1996, 1997, which was also documented in another UN report called the Garrison Report. So that Garrison Report played as a foundation for the United Nations Mapping Exercise Report. And the United Nations Mapping Exercise Report says that the RPF, if these Rwandan soldiers committed crimes in the Congo were brought in front of a competent court, they could be brought up on charges of genocide. Now, this is a report when we're talking about covering for these leaders that came out when Susan Rice was the US ambassador to the United Nations. And they were trying to suppress the report. In fact, the report had to be leaked. It's because it was leaked first in August of 2010, then it was published officially in October 1st of 2010. We had mobilized people to bombard Susan Rice's office with phone calls. Even former ambassadors were joining in, calling her office at the UN, calling on her to, not block the report, not shelve the report. And Kagame, just to give you a sense of the juice that he has, he was so furious of the report being accused of committing genocide in the Congo that he literally summoned the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to Kigali to address, to have a sit down with Kagame because of his discontent with that report. We had presented the report with the assistance of Congresswoman Donna Edwards from Maryland in the U.S. Congress. We did an entire briefing for members of the Congress, calling on members of the Congress to pressure then the Obama administration, right, to shed light, to not suppress this report that says that Rwanda could be charged for genocide. Rwandan soldiers could be charged for genocide in the Congo. So this gives you a sense of the extent to which the cover exists in spite of the abundance of evidence. Judy lays it out for you. International Criminal Tribunal of Rwanda, right up to this very day, right? We see the continuation of impunity. We see the lack of accountability. We see the lack of justice, and we see the devastation that has wrought on millions of lives in the Congo, right? So early 1990s, late 1990s to right here today, it hasn't fundamentally changed, and we have to continue to press, continue to demand justice, continue to demand accountability, and continue to expose the nature of the crimes that are being committed and how they're being covered up, whether it's sports washing, whether it's ambassadors, whether it's government, it's incumbent on us to continue to expose it.
Thank you for that, Maurice. I'm going to put the next question in the chat as I read it because it's a little long. So that way, if our panelists need a reference back to it. But the question is, according to the Observatory of Economic Complexity, OEC, an organization that maps global trade, Rwanda's biggest export recipients are the UAE, followed by China and then Thailand. Europe and the US do not even make up 131 million, as for Rwanda's second biggest export receiver, China. So if Rwanda is mainly trading with the West's quote unquote rivals, how come PK is seen as a darling or agent of the West instead of the UAE or China? And then I'm also going to go ahead and just throw in the second question that was also in the chat because it's relative, and it says, after several hundred years of negative colonization by many countries, how does Africa feel in general about China investment? So we'll look at that as two parts, the first question and then the second one. And then whoever wants to take it, go right ahead.
Well, I think so. Those figures are a bit misleading. It's transfers and exports between states, which have nothing to do with actually for example, the minerals that Rwanda is exporting to along the global supply chain. Those minerals don't immediately go to the US. And the reason why they don't immediately go to the US is that the United States doesn't have smelters and refiners. The smelting and refining process is hugely polluting. Okay, so those minerals go off mainly to Asia, China, and other countries, Thailand, and those suppliers then sell powders and metals in various forms and component to big tech. Okay, and a lot of big tech is in the US, as you know, not entirely, but the biggest companies and the biggest weapon manufacturers and technology companies are in the US. So that's the global supply chain. That's not going to show up, in the statistics or the figures that someone mentioned earlier. But this is the global supply chain. It's very useful, for the suppliers to big tech and weapons manufacturers to buy low-priced, steady amounts of strategic minerals from Rwanda. Okay, they're also getting a fairly good price directly for Congolese cobalt. And Congo is the biggest producer of cobalt in the world. And it's one of the biggest producers of copper. So Congo is extremely important. And as I said, Congo needs to be completely sovereign in order to get the best price for these minerals. And it has to ensure that the state doesn't steal that wealth from the people. And the miners and the people need to, the mining cooperatives and the people who live in the Kivus, they have been ripped off royally, and in Katanga as well, in the south, whereby I should mention, Kagame and his militia, the M23, are heading after having seized Uvira. So now Kagame is sitting in a position where he could, if he's not stopped, take copper and cobalt-rich Katanga after having basically seized the most mineral-rich areas of the Kivus. So that transfer of wealth is it's not that complicated, but it's not as direct as the person on that chat might think it is.
Thanks for that. Yeah, go ahead, Maurice.
That's also some other variables to take into consideration as well. A series of other variables, actually. For example, up to 40% of Rwanda's budget as a country is coming from the West, right? It's getting its financial support from the West. Just recently, the European Union entered into a multi-$100-million deal with Rwanda to source critical minerals for Europe through Rwanda, right? We see that, for example, I've shared before, where Rwanda serves as a offloading point for Israel, who is ready to serve for under Boris Johnson in the UK, but the courts intervened. So he was at service for the West. Then we also see that Kagame also farmed out his soldiers, right, as mercenaries to France and Europe in protecting their natural resource interests in Mozambique, Total Energies. So there are a range of variables that one can assemble to demonstrate Kagame's value to the West. Now, when you talk about the UAE, for example, we see that they serve as a convenient outlet, certainly for the gold. We have according to the International Monetary Fund, when Kagame's M23 first started at the end of 2021, 2022, Rwanda was exporting about a little over $300 million in gold, right? But as we come up to today, where they've captured major territory in the east of the Congo, the three largest cities now, in Goma, in Bukavu, in Uvira. Today, as we speak, according to the International Monetary Fund, Rwanda is exporting up to $2 billion in gold, right? And the thing about it is that these exports, this is an additional element, right? It's not solely the question of the plunder, but these exports are then placed on the books of the state as export gains. And when you have export gains like that placed on your books, it elevates your credit rating so that Standard & Poor's and others and give Rwanda better terms for borrowing in the global market. So they're just like layers of benefit that come from Rwanda's plunder of the east of the Congo. And as we've just recently seen in the White House last week, that Donald Trump has continued in the same vein as Macron out of France and the European Union in basically rewarding Rwanda for its wars of aggression and plunder against Congo by signing an agreement, what they call a regional economic integration framework, where that illicit trade that Rwanda has been engaged with, that the IMF talks about, that Global Witness talks about, it can now become licit under the Trump deal or the Trump agreements that were signed in the White House last week. So there's just like a bevy of variables that demonstrate the extent to which Rwanda benefits from the West and gets the support from the West as a result of the plunder of Congo's minerals. Now, just quickly in terms of China, if you probably the best, a few things in looking at the African continent and even Congo in particular. I think Judy really hit the nail on the head about sovereignty. It's so important to look at it from an African perspective. Like, it's not comparing China to the West. The question is there African sovereignty? Is Africa free to deal with whichever partner it chooses, the Chinese, the Russians, whoever, from a sovereign position, right? So that's one. In terms of the framing, it's really important that we look at it that way. Now, with China, what we've seen is that China is riding a beltway, right? A capitalist beltway. They may not have created it. It's a colonial beltway. It's a capitalist beltway, and China is going in and playing on that beltway for its own interests, right? Now, because the states and like take the Congo, for example, have been so weakened by its neocolonial leadership, it's not able to engage China in a way that can be fully beneficial to its people. And that's compounded, right, by the pressure that these neocolonial states get from the West. I'll give you a concrete example. The Congo wanted to enter into what they call a mineral for infrastructure swap, right, with China, 2008 or so. $9 billion deal on the table. So the World Bank comes in, International Fund comes in and says, well, you can't go ahead with this deal. Remember, we're talking about sovereignty, right? Congo ought to be able, good or bad, ought to be able to engage in whatever deal that it chooses, right? So the International Monetary Fund comes in, the World Bank comes in and says, well, you see that $11 billion debt that was accumulated under Mobutu, right? Well, we're not going to retire that if you go ahead with this deal. Oh, and the $600 million that you need to operate your government, we're not going to provide that if you go ahead with this Chinese deal. So the Chinese were furious, right? They say, well, the West is blackmailing the Congo by not allowing the Congo to enter into a sovereign deal that it chose to do, right? So Congo had to renegotiate the deal and renegotiate it down to $6 billion deal. Now, when we talk about I just want to go back quickly to that capitalist and how important it is to view it from the African perspective. The United States had control of one of the largest copper cobalt mine in the world. Judy rightly stated, Congo is the largest producer of cobalt in the world. They call them the Saudi Arabia of cobalt in the world, producing about 70% of the world's cobalt, right? And Congo is the second largest producer of copper in the world, behind Chile, right? Except for Congo doesn't have a Codelco like Chile does, right? A Codelco that captures much of the wealth to benefit the Chilean people. But what we saw here is a US company by the name of Tenke Fungurume out of Arizona, this is when John McCain was alive, had gotten the largest copper mine possibly in the world in terms of quality, right? And Freeport-McMoRan ran into debt issues in around 2016, 2017. So what did they do? They sold that Tenke Fungurume to Chinese. It's now owned by China Molybdenum, right? And according to the New York Times, it was Joe Biden's son, his company, Hunter Biden, who played a role in negotiating the sale of that mine from the US company to the Chinese company. So if you're a Congolese and an African, these deals are happening above your head. The people aren't benefiting. So it doesn't matter if the Chinese own it or the US own it, right? It's still a capitalist system where that renders the bulk of the Congolese population living in extreme poverty. So just wanted to share that in terms of the perspective, in terms of sovereignty, in terms of the global players, that it's the people who wind up getting the short end of the stick. And the challenge is for us to be in solidarity with those people so that they can be strengthened in order to put leaders in place that defend and protect their interests.
Do you want to have something?
Yeah, I wanted to say something on just the two issues regarding colonization and Chinese investment. On the ground, I can say that there is no difference between Chinese and others, because when they get there in Africa, they come with the companies, the supermarkets, everything, and many people, local people, don't have nothing in return. Okay, and what I can say is that the difference between maybe Western colonizers with the Chinese is that they exercise it very softly. I remember that when I was still in Africa, they could come and learn the local languages. What the Europeans didn't do. Europeans could still go to tennis together, but the Chinese could learn the language and do the same things as the local population. But behind that, they were they were monitoring the markets and so on. And there is somebody who asked a question, what a common man can do for DRC and Hutus. I think that even raising awareness is important. There are many books written out here, but many people don't know or don't know that they exist. But there are many books which are written on Congo, on Rwanda, even questioning our parliaments, because they have a duty towards citizens. If we have an issue, we can ask them to put that issue to the government and so on. I think that there are many things to, and even participates in activities like yours, who try to inform people, and so I can think there are many things to do. Sorry for my English, because I have to translate from French to English, so it's not so easy. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcy. And I think that's like a really good way to kind of like, because we got to start wrapping it up here. But first of all, I just want to like thank all of the speakers and our special guest panelists today. And I know that I'm not the only one at CodePink who wants to have more of these webinars. I feel like we only touched like the tip of the iceberg today. And I feel like there's so much more that we can cover, and that, you know, in part of this raise awareness type form of action and helping, that's what we can do, is give a platform for people to come on and educate and share all of this. And so Marcy kind of like laid out like her what she believes would be the best way for the common man or woman to do to right the wrongs. And so before we wrap, I just want to give Anne and Maurice and Judy also time, if there's some sort of like direct action or ways that our folks can take action that you want to uplift right now. I want to give y'all a chance to be able to do that. And before we end the webinar altogether, I just want to let all the participants know that we will be compiling a list of all the resources that were discussed here today, all the articles, all the links to books, the amazing organizations that Maurice and Marceline are work for. We're going to share that in a follow-up email. So you'll make sure you'll have all the resources shared, and you can further raising your consciousness and awareness, and then take what you're learning and share with others. And so, yeah, I'm just going to let Anne and Maurice and Judy also, if there's what would be your advice to us who that could start righting these wrongs and the fight for liberation.
I can go. I just put a link in the chat. freecongo.org. When you go there, there's three things that you can do right away, even before you get off the call. One, there's a humanitarian effort support that you can support by clicking as soon as you go to freecongo.org. It's a humanitarian relief effort that you can support. Two, the first action item there on the page is a letter that you can send to members of Congress, calling on members of Congress to withhold, not to allow U.S. taxpayers' dollars to sponsor war in the Congo by supporting the Kagame regime. We saw at the United Nations a couple of days ago that the United States spoke out against Kagame's troops in the Congo. They've been doing that for years. So speaking out is nothing new. They need action, right? Need to sanctions from the UN, withholding of aid. And this was done before in 2012. So it can be done again. So that's the second thing. And the third is for people to join the movement, to sign up, complete our email list. We have a series of actions that we'll be taking, against, encouraging the fans of the LA Clippers, Los Angeles Rams to cut their ties with Rwanda, build on the success that the fans had in England against the Arsenal. But sign up for our list in order to be a part of those actions. And visit us on our social media. We're at Congo Friends on Instagram and Facebook and X. We provide regular updates every day, and you can learn more and get more involved by following us and sharing our work on social media. I'll put our social media handle in the chat as well, at Congo Friends on the main social media platforms. Thank you so much, Code Pink. Thank you all. Thank you, Anne, Judy, Marceline. It was really a pleasure being on with you today.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
and you're muted if you're trying to talk.
Okay, yeah, here we go. Okay, there's one thing I want to say first. We put a lot of links in the chat, and other people were putting links in there. There's one thing that I had forgotten. Aimé, I think Aimé is here. He shared a link about Victoire's thoughts about the peace agreement, what should actually happen. Maybe if he's here, he could put that link in the chat. And I have one that was published in Al Jazeera. Before she was arrested, Victoire was managing to publish on CNN and The Guardian and Al Jazeera from time to time, especially Al Jazeera. And she wrote an article for Al Jazeera about how the voices of the voiceless needed to be considered in the so-called peace negotiations. As Maurice said, all these negotiations are happening way above the heads of the ordinary Congolese people and Rwandan people. So I'm going to put that Al Jazeera piece that Victoire authored in the chat. Also, I'd like to ask people to talk about Victoire, share this, and share the news. I always post news about Victoire on my social media pages on Twitter and Facebook, as does our RFIDP. And I had a couple of thoughts about that with regard to advocating for Victoire and with regard to this NBA, National Basketball Association issue. There were two, when the association with the National Basketball Association happened, there were two, I believe they were senators. Sorry, I can't remember. One of them was Merkel from Oregon, right? Merkel, who's a pretty good, he's a senator, right? Pretty good senator. And another one from the East Coast somewhere who wrote statements and I think in Congress questioned the NBA's decision to partner with Rwanda and with Kagame. And it's possible that someone could organize to see if they can talk to those two senators about Victoire. With your legislators, you can call and ask their office whether or not you can make an appointment. It's a kind of a long shot to get an appointment with the legislator themselves, but you can make an appointment to talk to their staff and tell them what you're concerned about and ask them conceivably to advocate for Victoire. And as Maurice said, there was a successful campaign to get Arsenal to end its sponsorship with Kagame, these Visit Rwanda. They're promoting Rwandan tourism and polishing Rwanda's images. The players come out wearing these badges that say, Visit Rwanda. And sometimes you get that message emblazoned in the sports arena. They were successful at getting Arsenal to end that partnership. I was at a protest during last year's NBA All-Star game. Congolese had organized a protest there. I reported on it for KPFA radio. These kinds of things can happen again. So one could aim for some success like that, like Arsenal had with discouraging the participation with the LA Clippers and any of these other sports sponsorships.
Thanks. And Judy, did you have any actions or anywhere to direct people or uplift right now before we close out?
Well, I would echo what both Maurice and Anne have said. Maurice said, get informed and listen to grassroots people. And both of them reiterated the importance of calling your local Congress or your local representatives. But I also want to say that Victoire has a very skilled international team of lawyers who are representing her, but she doesn't have access to them. And there needs to be an outcry. There needs to be a grassroots movement of outrage that she has been deprived of international legal representation. We saw when Paul Rusesabagina, one of Paul Kagame's political opponents, when he was kidnapped in 2020 and released 2.5 or almost 3 years later in 2023, we saw an overwhelming campaign, successful campaign by pro-democracy lobbyists in Washington, but also Hollywood got behind Paul Rusesabagina, helped his family put pressure on Paul Kagame and use all the political tools. Paul Rusesabagina was the inspiration for Hotel Rwanda. There needs to be that kind of wide-scale, very, very influential movement to back and support Victoire Ingabire.
Great. Yeah, that's super important, and hopefully more people know about her today that maybe didn't before, and we can get something moving to offer her the international support that she needs. Once again, I just want to thank our guest speakers today. All of you were amazing. I think y'all are doing amazing work. I'm so proud that y'all were that y'all all joined. And to our participants again, all of these resources, all these organizations that they work for, books they've written, will be shared out to you in a follow-up email, along with a recording of this webinar, so you can share it with other people, right? And we can keep broadening this and educating and raising consciousness. So just peace and love to everyone. Thanks for coming and participating today. I enjoyed it, and I hope we build off of this and come more webinars in the future. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the day. Be well.
The recording has stopped.